I need you to understand something before this story goes anywhere. I didn't stay silent because I was weak. I stayed silent because I was listening. That part always gets misunderstood. People think silence means surrender. They think if you don't fight back, you've lost. But silence can also be a place where things grow. Slowly, quietly, out of sight. And for 10 years. That's where I lived. The first time it happened, I didn't even recognize it as betrayal. That's the truth. It didn't arrive loudly. There was no confrontation. No shouting. No moment where the room froze and everything shattered. It came disguised as something smaller. Something easy to ignore. A decision made without me. A signature I didn't see. A conversation that happened when I wasn't in the room. When I found out, it was already done. I remember standing in the doorway of the kitchen, still wearing my jacket, keys in my hand, reading the email on my phone again and again, like the words might rearrange themselves if I stared long enough. They didn't. I felt that strange hollow pressure in my chest. Not pain. More like absence. I told myself it wasn't intentional. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always is, right? I waited until that evening to ask. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I asked carefully, like someone stepping onto thin ice. Why didn't you tell me? The answer came fast, too fast. I didn't think it was a big deal. That sentence ended something inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It just closed. You have to understand the relationship before you can understand what came next. We weren't unstable. We weren't toxic. We were ordinary in the most dangerous way. Years together, shared routines, familiar jokes, bills paid on time, dinners eaten in front of the same screen every night. Comfortable enough to stop explaining ourselves. I had trusted that comfort. I thought it meant safety. That night, after the conversation ended, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. Not because I was crying. I was. I just needed to be alone with the realization forming in my chest that this wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern starting to show itself. Over the next few months, I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. Decisions made without discussion. Plans changed last minute. My name missing from things it should have been on. Whenever I brought it up, the response was always the same. You're overthinking. It's not personal. You're making this bigger than it is. I started doubting my own reactions. That's how it works. Not with cruelty. With calm dismissal. No shouting, no insults. Just enough denial to make you question your own clarity. So I stopped pushing. Not because I agreed. Because I was learning. Silence changes how you observe people. When you stop arguing, people show you who they are without realizing it. They get comfortable. They stop performing. They stop hiding things they think you've already accepted. I noticed the confidence growing. The casual way my concerns were brushed aside. The subtle shift in power I hadn't named yet. I began keeping things to myself. Not secrets. Notes. Mental ones at first. Who spoke when decisions were made? Who benefited? Who was left out? It wasn't revenge then. It was survival. There was a moment, about a year in, where I almost broke. I remember it clearly. We were sitting across from each other, paperwork spread across the table. Something important, something that affected my future more than theirs. They were explaining the outcome to me. Explaining, not asking. I nodded while they spoke. Inside, something was screaming. But I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. When it was over, I said, "Okay." That was it. That okay cost me years. And it bought me something too. Time. Silence has a strange side effect. People assume you've moved on. They assume you've forgiven them. They assume you've accepted the rules they set. And once they believe that, they stop being careful. They talk freely around you. They underestimate you. They forget you're still there. I started hearing things I wasn't meant to hear. Not secrets. Truths spoken casually. Little admissions. Small jokes that revealed more than they realized. Every piece went into the same quiet place inside me. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I wouldn't forget. By year 3, I had changed. Not outwardly. I was still dependable, still calm, still reasonable. Inside, I was becoming very precise. I learned how systems worked, how influence moved, how decisions were actually made. I asked questions that sounded harmless. I listened more than I spoke. I never confronted. I let patterns repeat themselves until they were undeniable. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I was doing the wrong thing. If silence was just another form of fear. I asked myself that often. The answer never came immediately. By year 5, they trusted me completely. That's the part that still surprises people. You think betrayal would create distance. But silence creates safety for the wrong people. They began including me again. Not as an equal, as something predictable. Someone who wouldn't challenge them. Someone who would always be there. I accepted that role. And I watched. The realization that this could become revenge didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as clarity. One afternoon, sitting alone, I thought, they don't know who I am anymore. And worse, they don't think they need to. That was the moment everything shifted. Not toward anger, toward intention. I didn't plan destruction. I didn't dream about humiliation. I didn't want to hurt them the way I'd been hurt. I wanted balance. I wanted truth to land where lies had lived comfortably. And I knew something else then too. If I moved too fast, I would lose. So I stayed silent. And I kept waiting. Because some stories don't begin with action. They begin with restraint. And mine was still just getting started. Silence doesn't just hide your anger. It sharpens your hearing. By the time I realized that, years had already passed. Not quickly, slowly, the way water wears down stone without ever announcing itself. I was still there. Still present. Still reliable. That was the illusion. Inside, something had shifted into a different shape. There's a strange thing that happens when you stop reacting. People relax. They stop measuring their words. They stop checking their tone. They stop wondering how you'll respond. You become background. And background sees everything. I noticed how decisions were framed after they were already final. How credit traveled upward and responsibility flowed down. How mistakes were softened for some people and sharpened for others, including me. I didn't protest. I watched how often my name appeared only when something went wrong, and how rarely it appeared when something went right. I remember one meeting clearly. Nothing dramatic happened, that's why it stayed with me. Someone praised the outcome of a project I had carried for months, praised it warmly, generously. Then they thanked someone else. I felt the pause in the room. A few people glanced at me. I smiled. Not a forced smile. A calm one. I nodded, as if agreement was natural. Later, someone pulled me aside and whispered, "You should have said something." I said, "It's fine." And I meant something else entirely. At home, I became quieter. Not distant, just contained. I answered questions carefully. Shared less of my inner life. Not because I didn't feel. Because I was reorganizing those feelings into something usable. There were nights I lay awake, replaying conversations, wondering when exactly I'd stopped believing explanations and started collecting evidence. Not documents, moments. Tone changes. Eye contact avoided. The way people spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity forming, piece by piece. By year 6, I understood the structure I was inside. Who mattered? Who didn't? Who believed their position was permanent? Power isn't loud when it's comfortable. It's casual. That's what makes it dangerous. They spoke openly around me now. Complained. Confessed frustrations. Sometimes even admitted mistakes. They trusted my silence. They mistook it for loyalty. There was a moment where someone laughed and said, "You always land on your feet, don't you?" I nodded. Inside, I thought, "You have no idea how carefully I've learned to stand still." Silence gives you space to learn things you never had time for before. I learned patience the hard way. I learned how to let an insult pass without swallowing it. How to store it somewhere cool and quiet. I learned that revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with acceptance. Accepting that things are not going to change because you asked nicely. Accepting that fairness isn't automatic. Accepting that some people only understand consequences. Around year 7, the doubt came back. The dangerous kind. The kind that whispers, "What if you're just avoiding confrontation? What if silence is just fear wearing better clothes?" I asked myself that question honestly, again and again. And every time, the answer surprised me. If this were fear, I'd be shrinking. But I was. I was expanding. My understanding. My position. My options. Fear limits you. Silence was giving me room. I started making small choices differently. Nothing noticeable. I volunteered for things that gave me access, not visibility. I asked questions that revealed systems, not intentions. I listened when people vented. I remembered everything. And slowly, people began to rely on me in ways they hadn't before. Not because they respected me more. Because I was useful. That's an important distinction. One afternoon, someone slipped and said something they shouldn't have. It wasn't cruel. Just honest. They said, "You don't really push back, so this is easier." They laughed like it was harmless. I laughed too. But that sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. That was the role I'd been placed in. The quiet one. The absorber. The one who made things easier. And for the first time, I saw exactly how that role could be used in reverse. The idea of revenge didn't arrive with excitement. It arrived calmly, almost gently, like a thought you'd been circling for years, finally landing. I realized something simple. Everything they believed about me was something I had allowed. And what people believe dictates how they act. I didn't need to change myself. I needed to let them keep believing. From that moment on, my silence changed quality. Before, it had been defensive. Now, it was deliberate. I stopped questioning outcomes. I stopped correcting narratives. I let inaccuracies settle. Because once something is believed deeply enough, it becomes fragile. And fragile things break cleanly. I still had moments of sadness. That part doesn't disappear. I grieved the version of myself that thought honesty would be enough. I grieved the trust I'd given freely. But grief didn't control me anymore. It sharpened me. By year 8, I knew exactly where the pressure points were. Not people's weaknesses. Their assumptions. What they took for granted. Who they ignored. What they never double-checked. They assumed I would always adjust. Always accommodate. Always stay. That assumption became the foundation of everything they built. And foundations, once set, are hard to change. There was one conversation that sealed it. Someone asked me casually, "You're not going anywhere, right?" The question was half a joke. I answered honestly, "I'm here." I didn't say for how long. That night, I didn't feel anger. I felt ready. Not ready to act. Ready to wait a little longer. Because the closer people are to certainty, the less they see coming. And they were very certain about me. I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I was finally saying everything. Without opening my mouth. There's a point where silence stops being passive. It becomes structure. I didn't wake up one morning with a plan written in my head. Nothing like that. What I had was a map that had been drawing itself for years. Every conversation, every dismissal, every casual assumption about who I was and what I would tolerate. I didn't need imagination anymore. I had history. By year 9, people stopped explaining things to me altogether. That's how invisible I had become. Decisions were announced, not discussed. Outcomes shared, not debated. I was informed the way you inform furniture, as something that exists in the room but doesn't influence it. And I accepted that role with a calm that surprised even me. Inside, something else was happening. I was no longer hurt by it. I was studying it. What most people don't understand about revenge is this. If you want it to last, you can't rush it. If you want it to matter, you can't announce it. And if you want it to be clean, you can't let anger lead. Anger makes noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted inevitability. I began asking myself different questions. Not, why did they do this to me? But what do they rely on me for without realizing it? That question changed everything. Because when you answer it honestly, you stop feeling powerless. You start seeing leverage. They relied on my consistency. my reliability, my willingness to fix problems quietly. They relied on my memory, my ability to smooth things over, my habit of staying late when things went wrong. They relied on me without ever acknowledging it. That's a dangerous kind of reliance, because it blinds people. I didn't withdraw suddenly. That would have raised alarms. Instead, I adjusted slowly. I started documenting things that had never been documented before. Not in a dramatic way, in a careful one. Emails instead of conversations. Confirmations instead of assumptions. Nothing that looked like preparation. Everything that looked like responsibility. They liked that. They praised my professionalism. They didn't realize professionalism was becoming a record. At the same time, I stopped compensating. That's important. I stopped fixing other people's mistakes silently. Stopped covering gaps that weren't mine. When something broke, I let it be seen. Not exposed. Seen. And when questions came, I answered honestly. I followed the process. I shared the information. I assumed it was handled. All true. All devastating. There was a shift in the room. Subtle at first. Confusion. Small delays. Unclear accountability. People began asking questions they'd never needed to ask before. Not about me. About each other. I watched quietly. One afternoon, one said, "Things feel messier lately." They laughed when they said it. I didn't. But I nodded, like agreement was still my role. Inside, I thought, "No, things feel visible." This was the hardest part. Not the waiting. The restraint. There were moments I could have spoken up and changed everything immediately. Moments where one sentence would have exposed years of imbalance. I didn't take them, because exposure creates defense. And I didn't want defense. I wanted recognition. The kind that comes too late. I still struggled sometimes. There were nights I questioned myself. Am I becoming someone I don't respect? That question mattered to me. So I set a rule. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't sabotage. I wouldn't invent harm. I would only stop protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior. That felt clean. That felt fair. The turning point didn't arrive as a confrontation. It arrived as an invitation. Someone higher up asked me to help smooth things out. That phrase made me pause, because it meant they were finally feeling the imbalance I'd been absorbing for years. I agreed to help. Of course I did. And I helped exactly as much as my role required. No more. No less. Things escalated after that. Not dramatically. Administratively. Questions led to reviews. Reviews led to audits. Audits led to meetings. My name appeared often. Not as the problem, as the constant. The one thing that hadn't changed while everything else unraveled. That made people uncomfortable. Consistency does that when everything else is unstable. Someone asked me directly, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" The question was sincere. I answered calmly. I trusted the process. They didn't like that answer, because it was the same answer they'd given me years ago. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across faces that had never doubted themselves. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The slow, sinking realization that they'd built certainty on a false assumption. That assumption had been me. I didn't feel satisfaction yet. I felt gravity. The kind that pulls things toward an outcome, whether you interfere or not. All I had to do now was stay exactly where I was. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't mine alone. It spread. Meetings became careful. Conversations guarded. Laughter less confident. People started choosing their words. The room had learned something had changed. They just didn't know what. Someone said, half joking, "You've been very quiet lately." I smiled. I always am. But this time, they didn't laugh. That night, I sat alone and realized something that surprised me. I wasn't waiting anymore. The revenge wasn't coming. It was already happening. Quietly. Automatically. Because once people see the truth, you don't have to push. You just have to stop holding it back. I went to sleep knowing the hardest part was over. Not the outcome. The restraint. And I knew something else too. When the final moment came, it wouldn't look like revenge to anyone else. It would look like accountability. The strange thing about consequences is that they don't announce themselves. They don't walk in with raised voices or slammed doors. They arrive quietly, disguised as questions. Questions that start landing in your direction. The first one came early in the morning. A message, short, polite. "Do you have time to talk today?" I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I was afraid. Because I knew what it meant. When people stop assuming and start asking, the balance has already shifted. I replied the same way I always had. Of course. The room felt different when I walked in. Not hostile. Uncertain. People sat straighter, spoke slower, looked at each other before finishing sentences. The kind of room that knows something is wrong, but hasn't agreed on what yet. They asked me to walk them through the timeline. Not emotionally. Illogically. What happened? When? Who was involved? I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't editorialize. I told the truth the way I'd always told it. Calm. Precise. Complete. I watched faces change as the story assembled itself out loud for the first time. Not because it was shocking. Because it was undeniable. Someone interrupted. "Why didn't you raise concerns earlier?" There it was. The question everyone asks when silence finally speaks. I answered without rehearsing. I did quietly, repeatedly, and eventually I stopped being heard. No accusation. No bitterness. Just fact. That answer landed heavier than anger ever could. After that meeting, the hallway conversations changed. People didn't whisper when I passed. They stopped talking altogether. Not out of fear. Out of recalibration. They were rewriting their understanding of me in real time. And that made them careful. I felt something unexpected that week. Not triumph. Relief. Because for the first time in years, I was carrying the weight alone. The truth was in the room now. Shared. Visible. Unignorable. But visibility has its cost. That night, someone I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Not formally. Personally. "Can we talk?" I knew who it was before I saw the name. The one who had benefited the most from my silence. The one who'd smiled while decisions were made without me. We met somewhere neutral. Public, quiet. They didn't waste time. "I didn't know it was that bad," they said. That sentence almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I asked, "Did you ask?" They looked down. Silence returned, but not the kind I was used to. This one belonged to them. They tried to explain. Circumstances. Pressure. Miscommunication. The usual vocabulary of people facing consequences for the first time. I listened the way I always had. Carefully. And then I said something that surprised us both. "I believe you." Their shoulders dropped with relief. I held up a hand gently. "I believe you didn't think it would matter." That relief vanished. That's the thing people don't prepare for. It's easier to deny cruelty than indifference. Cruelty can be argued. Indifference just sits there. Uncomfortable. After that conversation, the requests started coming in waves. Clarifications. Confirmations. Follow-ups. People wanted me involved again. Not because they valued me. Because they needed me. And I gave them exactly what I had promised myself years ago. Nothing extra. That's when the offer came. Framed as opportunity. Disguised as trust. They wanted me to take on a role that would help stabilize things. More responsibility. More authority. Less ambiguity. It would have fixed everything instantly. It would have put me back in control. And it would have erased 10 years of quiet truth. I asked for time. They agreed. They always had. I went home that night and sat in the dark longer than usual. This was the moment people imagine revenge looks like. The choice. Take power now, or let the system finish revealing itself. I thought about the years I'd swallowed discomfort to keep things running. About how quickly stability had collapsed without me compensating. About how eager they suddenly were to restore balance on their terms. And I realized something clearly. If I accepted now, nothing would be learned. Only patched. The next day, I declined. Politely. Calmly. I don't think that's the right move. The reaction was immediate. Confusion. Concern. Urgency. They asked why. I answered honestly. Because the problem isn't my absence from authority. It's the assumption that I was ever meant to absorb the cost of other people's decisions. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Necessary. From that point on, things accelerated. Not loudly, but visibly. Reports were reviewed. Processes rewritten. Roles reconsidered. Names surfaced that had never been questioned before. Not because I named them. Because the system finally had to look at itself without my silence smoothing the edges. I was asked to stay involved. To advise. To guide. I agreed. On one condition. That nothing be rushed. They didn't argue. They couldn't. The irony wasn't lost on me. Weeks later, someone asked me a question I'd waited 10 years to hear. What would you have done differently? I thought carefully. Then I said, I would have spoken sooner if I believed I would be heard. That answer didn't accuse. It indicted. The shift was complete now. People no longer saw me as harmless. They saw me as accurate. And accuracy is dangerous when you've built comfort on assumption. But here's the part no one tells you. When the revenge finally lands, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the aftermath of something inevitable. Quiet, still, uncertain. Because the truth doesn't just change others. It changes you. I had one final decision left to make. One that would determine whether this ended as correction or something deeper. Someone came to me privately and asked, if this goes further, will you support it? I didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time in 10 years, the silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was asking something of me. There's a moment when revenge stops being about the past and starts asking what kind of future you're willing to live with. That moment doesn't come with drama. It comes with a quiet question that refuses to leave you alone. How much truth are you willing to let through, if it also passes through you? The question they asked me lingered longer than I expected. If this goes further, will you support it? Support is a soft word. It sounds harmless. But what they meant was this. Will you stand by the truth when it stops being abstract? When names are attached? When consequences stop being theoretical? When people you've known for years look at you differently? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know. Because I did. And knowing scared me more than uncertainty ever had. I asked for time. Again. In the days that followed, people treated me differently. Carefully. Respectfully. Sometimes nervously. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone publicly. But the silence had shifted ownership. It no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the room. At night, I thought about the early years. The version of me who believed staying quiet would keep things intact. Who thought patience was the same as tolerance. I realized something then that hurt more than the betrayal ever had. No one had forced me to stay silent. I had chosen it. Not out of weakness. Out of hope. Hope that things would eventually balance themselves. They never do. Not without pressure. One evening, someone I trusted called me. Not a superior. Not a decision maker. Someone who had watched quietly the way I had. They said people are scared. I asked, of what? They paused. Of being exposed. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. That made sense. They think you're angry, they continued. I smiled. That's convenient for them. Anger is easier to dismiss than clarity. Anger can be framed as personal. Clarity forces structure to answer for itself. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of carrying what didn't belong to me. Tired of translating discomfort into politeness. Tired of being the quiet solution to other people's problems. When the follow-up meeting came, the room was full. Not crowded. Deliberate. Everyone knew why we were there. The question wasn't whether things had gone wrong. The question was how far the correction would go. They asked me to speak, not to accuse, to contextualize. I took a breath, and I told the story the way it had actually happened. I talked about patterns, not people. About systems, not motives. About how silence had been mistaken for consent. I explained how often I'd raised concerns quietly. How often they'd been minimized. I didn't dramatize the cost. I let them imagine it. That's more effective. At one point, someone interrupted. "This isn't fair. You're making it sound intentional." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "I'm making it sound comfortable." That word changed the temperature in the room. Comfort is harder to defend than intention. I noticed something as I spoke. No one was interrupting anymore. Not because they agreed. Because they recognized the truth in what I was saying. Recognition is louder than argument. When I finished, the room stayed quiet. Not the awkward kind. The kind where people are doing internal math. Calculating cost. Reputation. Risk. I didn't push. I sat back. I had learned that silence still had work to do. Afterward, one person approached me privately. They looked older than I remembered. "Do you hate us?" they asked. It was an honest question. I answered honestly. "No." They looked relieved. "I just stopped protecting you from yourselves." That relief didn't last. The next few weeks were heavy. Processes paused. Reviews deepened. People were asked questions they'd never been asked before. Some answered well. Some didn't. I watched carefully how each response changed the shape of the room. Truth has a way of reorganizing space. There were moments of doubt. I won't pretend there weren't. Late nights where I wondered if I'd gone too far. If restraint would have been kinder. But kindness without boundaries becomes erasure. I had learned that too late to forget it. One morning, I received a message that made my hands still. They were moving forward. Fully. Not partially. Not symbolically. They wanted my support on record. They wanted me present when decisions were finalized. This was it. The point of no return. I sat with that message longer than any other. 10 years of silence had brought me here. Not to power, to responsibility. I ask myself the hardest question yet. If this costs people their positions, their certainty, their future, can you live with that? The answer didn't come as a feeling. It came as memory. Of every time I'd swallowed discomfort so others could remain comfortable. Of every quiet okay that had cost me something invisible. Of every night I'd wondered if I was imagining things. I typed one word. Yes. After that, things moved quickly. Decisions were documented. Outcomes finalized. People were informed. Some accepted it with grace. Some didn't. One person confronted me in the hallway. "You could have stopped this." I met their eyes. So could you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When it was over, I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty. Not in a bad way. In a way that comes after carrying something too long. Like setting down a weight you forgot you were holding. That night, I went home and sat in the quiet. No noise. No celebration. just the hum of something ending. Revenge would feel sharper, more satisfying. But real revenge doesn't announce itself. It resolves. Still, something unsettled me. A question I hadn't answered yet. If silence had been my weapon, what would my voice become now? Because the story wasn't finished. Not really. Someone would come to me soon, with a request that would blur the line between justice and mercy. And the decision I made then would change how I saw myself forever. By now, the air in the room had changed completely. It wasn't tense. It wasn't angry. It was cautious, deliberate, aware. They knew silence could no longer protect them. They knew I had watched. I had waited. I had collected every piece of truth without judgment. And now, all of it rested in my hands. It happened quietly, the way all major moments in life tend to. A knock on my office door. Not formal, not urgent, just deliberate. And I looked up. It was the one person who had benefited the most from my silence. Their expression was neutral, but there was an unmistakable edge. A mix of apprehension and hope. They weren't used to being uncertain. And for the first time, uncertainty belonged to them. "Can we talk?" they asked. I nodded. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. We sat. I didn't speak first. I didn't need to. They filled the space with words that tried to explain, to justify, to preempt what they knew was coming. I listened carefully. Every pause, every hesitation, every word that betrayed their certainty. I remembered everything I had seen over the past 10 years. Every time they dismissed me, ignored me, assumed my compliance. Every moment they assumed I was too weak, too quiet, too unimportant to make a difference. Every one of those moments had been a lesson, a map, a slow preparation for the day when silence would no longer be passive. Finally, they stopped speaking, waiting for the verdict, for the response that would determine their next steps. I leaned forward. My voice was steady, calm. The words had been chosen over years of restraint. You've asked me to guide things forward, to stabilize what has been left unchecked. I will. But I will not protect comfort at the cost of truth anymore. The room, small, quiet, neutral, felt heavier suddenly. They swallowed. I watched them struggle with the idea that truth could be enforced without malice. That accountability didn't have to be loud or dramatic. That consequences could exist without fury. That was the power I had cultivated. Not intimidation. Not vengeance for spectacle. A quiet inevitability that could not be ignored. Over the next few weeks, the consequences unfolded slowly, deliberately. Processes were rewritten. Responsibilities realigned. Decisions that had long been taken for granted were reconsidered carefully. People began asking questions they had never asked before. Some were hesitant. Some were defensive. Some were genuinely reflective. And all of them realized that the quiet person they had underestimated for a decade had not only remembered everything, but understood everything. But here's the part that surprised me the most. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clarity. Not satisfaction. Not vengeance fulfilled. Not anger released. Just a deep, almost disorienting clarity about what had been endured, and what had been allowed to happen because I had chosen to observe instead of react. Then the unexpected came. The person who had confronted me weeks earlier returned. Their tone was softer this time. Measured, almost hesitant. "You didn't have to do this," they said. "You could have let it slide like before. You could have stayed silent." I leaned back, letting the weight of my years of silence settle. "Silence," I said slowly, "is only powerful when it is intentional. When it is, it's just compliance." They nodded, a little stunned. It wasn't an apology I needed. It wasn't even recognition. It was acknowledgement. And that acknowledgement was enough. Because for the first time in 10 years, they knew. They truly knew. And then came the hardest question of all. A choice I hadn't anticipated until that exact moment. Will you stay now, or will you leave? It wasn't about position. It wasn't about authority. It was about presence. About how much I was willing to witness, and how much I was willing to allow to continue unchallenged. I paused, longer than usual. The air thickened around the words that hadn't yet been spoken. I thought about every quiet "okay" I had ever swallowed. Every compromise I had silently endured. Every betrayal that had been minimized. Every time I had waited, observed, and let time become my weapon. Finally, I answered, "I will stay, but only on my terms." Not loudly. Not angrily. Not vindictively. Just clearly. Those words carried more weight than anything I had done in the past 10 years. Because this was not about revenge anymore. It was about ownership. Ownership of my choices. Ownership. IP of my silence. Ownership of the truth. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge is never a story of victory over others. It is a story of reclaiming yourself. Of reclaiming the space that was quietly stolen while you observed. Of restoring balance without destruction. The room, the people, the past 10 years, all of it shifted. Not because I yelled. Not because I punished. But because I finally allowed reality to exist exactly as it had been and insisted it be recognized. That night, I went home alone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't reflect dramatically. I simply sat quietly, the way I had for 10 years, and let the finality of choice wash over me. The hardest part wasn't the waiting. It wasn't the planning. It wasn't even the subtle unraveling of their assumptions. It was deciding, in the end, how much truth I was willing to let flow, and understanding that even quiet justice has consequences. The day after I made my decision, the atmosphere was unmistakable. Not tense, not fearful, not hostile. Just different. People began to measure their words. Conversations slowed. Glances lingered longer than usual. I realized then that the most subtle form of revenge isn't about shouting. It isn't about dramatic confrontation. It's about presence. When people know that the quiet observer finally sees everything, the room changes. The first ripple was almost invisible. A colleague, someone who had spent years walking in the shadow of my compliance, paused before sending a report. The usual offhanded message that used to fly by was now carefully considered. I didn't intervene. I didn't need to. Just existing with the weight of truth made people reconsider. Made them pause. made them accountable in ways they hadn't been before. That week, subtle cracks began appearing in long-held assumptions. People who had once been untouchable, who had spoken freely while I remained silent, now spoke cautiously. They measured tone. They double-checked facts. They hesitated before passing judgment. The same individuals who had ignored me for years were suddenly aware that someone had been keeping track. And that someone had memory. At first, I wondered if I had gone too far. Not morally, not ethically, but emotionally. There's a strange weight to watching people slowly realize the cost of their complacency. A slow recognition that they had underestimated you can leave you uneasy, even if you are justified. But the unease faded when I remembered the decade of silent endurance. The years I had absorbed dismissal and indifference, carefully documenting moments that others would only now recognize. Then came the first direct confrontation. A manager, someone who had often dismissed my input, approached me privately. Their face was controlled, neutral, but the tension in their voice betrayed the calculation behind each word. "You've made a lot of people uncomfortable," they said. I nodded. I did what was necessary. "Necessary," they repeated. "Do you know what you've started?" "Yes," I said calmly, "and I know exactly how far it needs to go." That was the moment I understood the most dangerous part of quiet revenge. It doesn't just change others. It changes you. You stop reacting emotionally. You begin to act deliberately. You see the patterns, the dependencies, the fragile assumptions, and you decide which to leave intact and which to expose. It's a careful, delicate process, like rearranging a set of dominoes that are only partially visible. One wrong move and chaos can ensue. One precise move and balance is restored, silently but irrevocably. Over the next month, the ripples grew. Reports were corrected before errors became visible. Decisions that had once been dismissed were reconsidered. People began checking each other's work instead of assuming someone else would absorb the consequences. I didn't congratulate anyone. I didn't point out what they had missed. I simply allowed the system to correct itself under my observation. It was subtle, but undeniable. I started noticing small acts of recognition, almost accidental. A colleague thanking me quietly for clarifying a detail. Someone mentioning my role in improving workflow without realizing they were giving me credit for oversight I had never sought. A team member hesitating before bypassing a process that I had watched ignored for years. No one knew the full story. They didn't have to. The ripples themselves were the message. But not all reactions were careful or grateful. Some people reacted defensively. They whispered, questioned, doubted. They tried to reassert the assumptions that had made them comfortable. And I let them. I didn't intervene. Because every attempt to resist only made the truth more apparent. It was the slowest, quietest form of teaching anyone could experience. Patience was the sharpest tool in my arsenal. Then came the unexpected. One of the people I had once considered an ally approached me. They had benefited from my silence. They had thrived while I waited. "I don't know how to navigate this," they admitted, voice low. "You've changed everything." I didn't answer immediately. I let the words hang. Finally, I said, "It's not about me. It's about reality finally matching perception." They looked at me, confused, frustrated, and then reflective. The ripple had reached them too. Over the following weeks, the effect extended beyond the office. Subtle shifts in hierarchy. A recalibration of respect. People beginning to recognize not just what they had ignored, but who they had underestimated. And me, I stayed quiet. Always. Observing, calculating, waiting. Because even after all this, the final outcome hadn't arrived yet. I knew that to finish this story, one last decision was coming. One last test of restraint. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The longest decade of my life had led me to this, a moment that didn't announce itself. It didn't burst in with confrontation or loud revelation. It arrived softly, imperceptibly, the kind of moment you almost miss if you're not paying attention. And yet, when it came, it was undeniable. It started with a simple email. Not demanding, not accusatory. Just a request for a private conversation. I knew who it was from before opening it. The one person who had shaped much of the silence I had carried. The person whose assumptions had created the perfect conditions for my patient revenge. They wanted to meet. Alone. In a neutral place. When I arrived, they were already waiting. No theatrics, no gestures. Just someone accustomed to certainty, now encountering uncertainty. They looked at me with a careful gaze, one that searched for reaction. One that tried to measure how much I had absorbed, how much I had remembered, how much I had allowed to grow in quiet. I smiled slightly, not triumphantly, not maliciously. Just in acknowledgement. I didn't expect this, they began. I waited. You've changed everything, they continued. I thought you stayed silent because you were okay with it. I didn't realize you were watching, learning, planning. I didn't correct them. I didn't have to. Because the truth doesn't always need words. I remembered all the years. The meetings where my input was ignored. The projects I carried silently. The moments when I smoothed over mistakes that weren't mine. The countless times I believed patience would balance justice, only to learn that it would not. All of it had led to this quiet convergence of observation and consequence. They swallowed. I could see the realization forming. This you could have stopped at any time, they said, voice trembling slightly. Yes, I replied. I could have, but I waited. Waited? Yes, waited until truth became inevitable. Until consequences no longer needed my interference to exist. Until silence carried weight. Until the assumptions that shaped your comfort finally crumbled under their own structure. For a moment, silence returned. Not mine. Theirs. It was the kind of silence that acknowledges a shift it can't undo. They had relied on my quiet for years. They had assumed I was compliant, invisible, harmless. And now, the foundations of that assumption were gone. Then came the hardest words. Do you hate us? They asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I never hated anyone. I just stopped protecting them from themselves. That pause hit harder than any accusation could. They had relied on me to absorb discomfort, mistakes, and reality itself. I had stopped. And the consequences were falling naturally. Over the following weeks, the ripple effect spread further than I had imagined. Colleagues who had once thrived under my silence were now cautious. Conversations were measured. Decisions were double-checked. The invisible hand I had once used to smooth over errors was now absent, and the structure of assumptions wobbled under its own weight. And yet, I didn't gloat. I didn't intervene. I let the system correct itself under the weight of truth. Because the most powerful form of revenge isn't loud. It's inevitable. But this moment, this personal confrontation, left me feeling something I hadn't anticipated. Empathy. Not for them. Not exactly. But for myself. For the person who had endured dismissal, indifference, and misunderstanding for 10 years. For the person who had learned patience, observation, and strategy without bitterness. For the person who had turned silence into power without losing integrity. And then came the question I had been avoiding in my own thoughts for years. Will you stay now? It wasn't about authority. It wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. About whether I would continue to witness the consequences I had unleashed, or step back and let them play out alone. I thought about the years of restraint, the calculated patience, the careful documentation of truth, the observation that had taught me more than any confrontation ever could. I thought about the quiet power I now held, not over others, but over myself. And I answered, I will stay, but only on my terms. Those words were final. No theatrics. No shouting. No vindictive gloating. Just the calm, deliberate voice of someone who had learned that revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about reclaiming yourself. Your voice. Your space. Your truth. And for the first time in a decade, I felt the quiet relief of ownership. That night, I sat alone and reflected. I didn't celebrate. I didn't boast. I didn't write or call anyone. I just let the weight of what had happened settle. The room, the people, the years of silence. Everything had shifted. Not because I demanded it. Not because I coerced it. But because I had chosen patience, observation, and inevitability over emotion and anger. And that, I realized, was the true power of quiet revenge. The days after the final confrontation were quieter than I expected. Not silent. Not empty. Just different. People didn't avoid me anymore. They didn't dismiss me. They spoke with consideration. Sometimes even with respect. I watched it all unfold without interfering. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the ripple effect had already done its work. The balance had shifted. The room had corrected itself. It was strange to feel so free. For years, I had carried the weight of their assumptions, the burden of their mistakes, the unspoken work that no one credited me for. And now the weight was gone. Not transferred, not punished, just lifted. I realized then that the hardest part of revenge isn't the execution. It's the letting go. People began approaching me differently. Some with gratitude, some with curiosity, some with quiet, hesitant acknowledgement of their own errors. I didn't correct them. I didn't elaborate. I just observed. There is a satisfaction in watching understanding dawn without needing to explain it. In watching someone recognize the truth they had once overlooked. At home, I felt changes too. I slept more deeply. I stopped replaying old grievances in my mind. I didn't need to justify my patience anymore. The years of silent endurance had transformed into something I hadn't expected. Confidence, clarity, peace. I started writing again. Not for anyone else. Not for vindication. Just for myself. I wrote about the quiet moments, the choices, the observations, the restraint. I wrote about the slow, deliberate path of revenge that didn't hurt others unnecessarily, but still corrected the imbalance. And as I wrote, I realized the most important lesson. Revenge isn't about control. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your voice, your boundaries. It's about showing, through patience and quiet persistence, that neglect and dismissal have consequences. Not everyone reacted well. Some were angry. Some tried to distance themselves. Some whispered behind my back. I let them. Because when you act without malice, without drama, without spectacle, the outcome is undeniable. And those who refuse to accept it only isolate themselves in their own denial. A friend asked me recently, "Do you regret it?" I paused. Not because I did, but because the answer wasn't simple. "No," I said finally. But it changed me. It taught me patience. It taught me observation. It taught me that power isn't always in action, it's in restraint. Sometimes, I still think about the years I stayed silent. The moments I endured, misunderstood, and ignored. And I realized something profound. Those years weren't wasted. They were preparation. Training for the day I could act deliberately, without anger, without haste. And when that day came, revenge didn't feel like satisfaction. It felt like truth finally finding its way home. The room remains the same in structure, but different in essence. People speak carefully. They act thoughtfully. They assume less. They observe more. And I remain quietly present. A reminder of what happens when silence is deliberate. A living example that patience is not weakness, and observation is not passivity. Revenge, I discovered, doesn't need to roar. It doesn't need to punish. It doesn't need to humiliate. It simply needs to arrive. Quietly, inevitably, and leave you in the end stronger than before. And now, as I sit back and reflect, I ask myself one final question. What does someone do after they've spent a decade observing, waiting, and letting truth unfold? The answer isn't clear. Perhaps that's the real lesson. The end of revenge isn't a victory over others. It's a new beginning for yourself. The weeks after everything settled were almost surreal. No dramatic confrontations. No celebrations. No validation from others. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I found something unexpected. Freedom. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It comes softly, like the morning light after a long night. I no longer carried the den of unacknowledged work. I no longer compensated silently for mistakes that weren't mine. I no longer pretended that patience and silence were weakness. I had reclaimed my voice, not to punish, not to triumph, but simply to exist fully, honestly, and without compromise. I thought about the people whose assumptions had shaped my decade of silence. Some had changed. Some hadn't. Some avoided me. Some approached with careful respect. That was their choice. I didn't need to control it anymore. The quiet lesson had been delivered. The consequences had landed, and life continued differently for everyone involved. I reflected often on the nature of revenge. The movies and stories you hear about it always show fury, chaos, and confrontation. But that's not how real revenge works. It's not about anger. It's not about hurting others. It's about reclaiming what was lost, what was ignored, and what was misused. It's about restoring balance without losing yourself in the process. In the months that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in myself. I no longer questioned my worth in the silence of others. I no longer assumed my voice would be dismissed. I learned to speak carefully, deliberately, and with intention. And I realized something profound. Patience and observation are more powerful than noise. One evening, I walked past the office where the ripples had begun. People were busy, focused, talking, collaborating. The room looked the same, but it felt different. The structure remained. The people remained. The history remained. But the culture, the assumptions, the unspoken dynamics, they had changed forever. And I had witnessed it without drama, without confrontation. I had done it quietly, deliberately, with inevitability. I thought about what I had learned. Silence is not weakness, it can be power. Patience is not an action, it's strategy. Observation is not passivity, it's preparation. Revenge is not about harm, it's about reclaiming your truth. And finally, I understood that the hardest part isn't taking revenge. It's living with yourself afterward. Some nights, I still think about the choices I made, about the years of restraint, about the moments I could have acted sooner, about the people who never recognized me until I stopped protecting them from their own actions. And I feel peace. Not triumph, not victory, but clarity. Because I realized the ultimate lesson. Revenge, when done thoughtfully and with restraint, doesn't ruin lives. It restores balance. It honors patience. It teaches without malice. And it allows you to finally move forward, unburdened. I don't know what comes next. Life continues, with choices, mistakes, victories, and regrets. But I do know this. I no longer fear being overlooked. I no longer assume my voice will be ignored. I no longer underestimate the quiet power of patience. And in that, I am free.